Counting, now gone.
Now, well, danger of the virus isn't gone. We're learning how to live with it. Canada's getting ready for a very different kind of summer as we figure out how to get back to work and life safely.
Tonight, we want to talk about the path forward, your issues, your questions, your concerns as Canada starts to reopen. We'll put them to health experts and your public officials, including Finance Minister Bill Morneau.
Right now, I'm mixed with a whole bunch of terror and a desire for optimism.
Worrying about all of my employees and my bills.
Got so many plans, but I had to cancel everything.
I was used to going to see my mom once or twice a week.
I don't think things are going to go back to normal.
I got some optimism.
A lot of catching up to do.
Digitally, people are forming a sense of community.
Just need to be home and stay safe.
And keep hoping so everything gets better.
I look forward to the new normal, whatever that is.
This is a CBC News special virtual town hall, Living with COVID. We are here on CBC News Network, CBC Radio 1, and we're also streaming around the world online and on CBC Gem. Over the next couple of hours, I'll bring your questions and issues to leaders at all levels of government, and of course, we'll talk to you, Canadians from every part of the country.
And I'll be listening to you at home, bringing in your reaction to what you're hearing on the show and your questions. This is a live town hall, so we want you to have your say. You can tweet me and Rosemary, email us at covid@cbc.ca, or you can leave a note on our Facebook live stream on the CBC News page. I'll be watching those throughout the evening.
A town hall unlike any other, but really we are living in a time like any other. And in a few minutes, we're going to start, of course, hearing from you, Canadians who are trying to navigate your way through this health crisis, but also an economic one for many of you. And I'll put some of your questions to the country's Minister of Finance. But first, let's take a look at the avalanche of government funding that has been pumped into the economy to try and keep Canada and Canadians going.
$82 billion, more than $77 million, $100 million. I want you to know that we'll be there to help you.
The announcement started in March, millions and billions of dollars at a time. Money first to help workers suddenly out of a job and businesses not allowed to open.
The Canada Emergency Response Benefit will provide $2,000 a month. We're facilitating a wage subsidy up to 75%.
Then came $9 billion to help post-secondary students, $2.5 billion for seniors, and money for farmers.
$125 million National Agri-Recovery Initiative.
All of it adding up to a staggering total, more than $150 billion and counting.
So the question, of course, are these measures helping Canadians? Is this enough? Nim Calvez was laid off from her job as a hotel attendant, and she joins me now from Surrey, British Columbia. Good to see you, Nim.
Hi, Rosemary. Thanks for having me.
So you were laid off, not surprisingly, as hotels and the tourism sector closed down. What have you done to help yourself, and how has the government helped you?
The government help us with the CERB, the $2,000 benefit that they're giving us. But aside from that, there's not much available for the workers, and it's pretty disappointing. But we're hoping in the long run or long term, the government will figure out something for the workers, especially in my industry. We are the most hardly hit because we rely on tourism for our business and for our work. And seeing how things right now, it's gonna be a while before people want to travel or stay in hotels.
Well, and I think your issue is more complicated because the $2,000 is not just helping you, it's also helping your daughter who is in the Philippines. Is that right?
Yes. So aside from myself, I'm helping a family in Philippines, and I'm sending them money mostly every month. And the living expenses in Vancouver alone is very expensive. From $2,000, my rent is almost $1,500, $500. What's left for food and groceries, and that's that's nothing. And I am using other resources like credit card to stay afloat.
And how long do you think you can go on like that, Nim?
It's not long. Like after a couple of months, and I'm not just speaking for myself, I'm speaking for my coworkers, the hotel industry, and I'm sure a lot of us, not just hospitality industry, is hit hard with this. The majority of workers are struggling, and it's very devastating for everyone to navigate in this hard times.
Sure. I'm going to talk to the finance minister in a moment. If you had anything that you wanted to ask him, what would you say to him?
I'd like the government to think of helping workers in the long term, because right now it's fine, but after maybe a month or two, even right now, we're not okay. It's we lose half of our wages, and that's very hard, but we can manage for short term. Long term, we need the government to think about how are we gonna survive as an industry. As I've said, like we rely on tourism, and it's gonna be a while before it's gonna come back. Who knows if we're gonna come back this year? We're thinking more likely it's gonna take us 18 to 24 months to recover. And losing our job, we also lose our health benefits, and our right to return to work is in jeopardy as well. So we're not just looking at financially, but we are looking with a big picture and our future. And it's very sad because a lot of us, we have put 20, 30, 40 years of our lives doing this job, and it's so devastating that we don't know what the future holds, and no one can answer it for that. Right now, we're just waiting for what's available to us, and the $2,000. I'm not speaking just for myself. I'm sure it's not enough.
Okay, Nim Calvez, thank you so much. I'll put some of that to the finance minister. I wish you good health and good luck there. Thanks for speaking with us very much.
Thank you very much for having me.
Okay, that's Nim Calvez. She's unemployed right now in Surrey, British Columbia. And on that note, let me bring in the Finance Minister, Bill Morneau, who's been leading so much of this really bridge financing support. It's not really, it's nothing more than that right now. We're just trying to get past this. So let's talk about what Nim has said there. The CERB, obviously not as much as she was getting in her job, but she also is wondering what's going to happen in the future. So should we expect that benefit to be extended?
I think, the place to start is just to acknowledge that what Nim's talking about, that's what we were thinking about as we started down the path, and how were we going to actually help Canadians through such an incredibly difficult time, whether it's for her and her daughter, or whether it's for Canadians in so many different parts of the country in so many different sectors. So it's exactly what we were thinking about. And we were really very much thinking about bridging people through a difficult time. I think she's correct in saying that for some, it's going to be a longer, difficult time. So we're thinking about multiple ways we can help. So the benefit she's on, the emergency response benefit, I mean, it's helping millions of Canadians. So more than 7.5 million Canadians are on this benefit, which tells you the scale of the challenge, but also the scale of the support. The longer term, we're trying to make sure that we support businesses that are employing people to get through this time, whether they're small businesses or large businesses, so that people like Nim will have a job when this comes through.
Except, of course, this sector is one that is going to be affected differently and probably longer than other sectors because it's the hotel industry, tourism. We don't expect that to bounce back very quickly. So could you look at perhaps the CERB being used targeted to industries if needed? Is that something you would consider? How would you gauge whether it needs to be extended, I guess is what I'm asking.
What we're looking at now is how do we encourage businesses to keep their workers attached to them. So that's why the Prime Minister announced last week that we're looking at that wage subsidy that keeps people attached to their business, extending that and think about how we can do that in a way that supports jobs. The emergency response benefit and the employment insurance system, we need to think about how those work together. It's going to be complicated for sure, and we're working through that now. What we recognize, though, is that the best we can do is to support people now and to enable businesses to keep having optimism and having opportunities down the road, so that if Nim doesn't have a role in the business that she's in right now, there might be another role that she might be able to get, because we've helped so many businesses to bridge through this time. So there will most certainly be businesses that are hurt more than others because of the challenge that we're facing. And we're trying to support them. We're trying to give them the bridge. We know for some it will need to be longer.
Okay, so I'm just trying to read through and understand what you're saying. It sounds like the CERB could become something else, a different kind of support, but the government's preference would be for most people to be put on a wage subsidy. Is that a fair way to assess it?
I think what we're trying to do is to make sure all of these investments, and they're, as you mentioned in the outset, they're enormous direct investments in people, that those investments allow us to have a stronger economy coming out. And that will be what will create jobs. So the emergency response benefit, that's a key part of the bridging.
Sure.
We're going to need to think about how we move to what we hope will be the new normal as we get to transition back to a more hopeful time.
You've already, or the Prime Minister has already said the wage subsidy will be extended another month. There's supposed to be some details this week. How will it be extended? Will it mean that more companies can apply? Will it be a longer period of time? Are you looking at months now of offering the wage subsidy? Anything you can tell me there?
More details will be announced. They won't be announced here tonight. No. So I will tell you that, one of the things that we've been working on every day over the last few weeks is thinking about what are the next steps? How do we make sure that we're dealing with this on an emergency basis, but we also need to have a midterm, how are we going to move forward? So we'll have some more details pretty clear in the next while, but I will tell you the intent. The intent is for people to be able to stay attached to their employer, to have optimism that these businesses will continue to be successful. The wage subsidy is a big support, and obviously the financing we've provided for business is also important.
One of the things the government did, along with the provinces, is come to an agreement that essential workers' pay could be topped up. The provinces get to decide who those workers are, but the federal government put money on the table. Do you think that longer term there is a role for the federal government in making sure that wage inequities like the ones we are seeing in such a drastic way right now are better protected? Is there a role that you would see in the future for the federal government in determining that or in helping that?
So this is the nature of many questions that are coming my way.
Yes.
A lot of people are saying, should we deal with systemic long-term issues? And of course, there will be time for those discussions. Right now, we're very focused on the emergency supports to get people through this. I think that decision we took to move money from the federal government to the provinces for low-income essential workers, we looked at the challenges in the long-term care sector and realized that we needed to find a way to be supportive. So I directly went to the finance ministers across the country and said, we want to figure out a way that those low-income, the real heroes that are working in some places right now have the kind of support they need. Now, there will be a longer-term question. We'll need to address that. We'll need to address that cooperatively with the provinces, but it will come, and it will come soon.
Okay, we're going to leave it there just for a moment. Minister Morneau is going to stay around for a little bit longer. He'll be back in a few minutes to take some more questions. For now, though, let's go to someone else who's got a question for Minister Morneau. Who says that the government measures may not, in fact, be enough to save his bar. Christopher Hudspeth owns Pegasus on Church in Toronto's LGBTQ neighborhood. He posted a letter about his situation on social media, and he did address it to several political leaders, including Ontario's Premier, the Mayor of Toronto, and indeed the Finance Minister. Here's a bit of what that letter says. He writes, I sit here today shaking my head, not knowing where to turn next. Can someone help? Is there help for small business? Can Pegasus survive? Or do we, like several already on Church Street, just throw in the towel and give up the fight? And Christopher Hudspeth joins us now from his bar in Toronto's Village. Good to see you, Christopher.
Thank you for having me tonight, Rosemary.
So what is the main concern there with your bar, Pegasus? Have you been able to tap into any small business loans or anything that has been put on the table? How are you doing?
Sure. We've tapped into the $40,000 loan that the federal government has extended. We also have applied for the wage subsidy, which is helping pay some of my employees. But currently, my landlord is unwilling to take the CECRA program, and so that leaves us, with the entire rent bill, which is extremely high in downtown Toronto.
Can you give me a sense of how big it is? Because I'm guessing that the 40 grand doesn't really come close to covering it.
We're talking tens of thousands, and to put it to give some perspective, it's 10 times what my house payment is.
Okay, yeah, that gives me a lot of perspective, particularly given houses in Toronto are expensive too. So you've got a little bit of help, but you're not making any money. I mean, what would help you right now, or how do you plan to survive if you do?
Well, I mean, our projections show that we can go a few months, but we're already seeing businesses on the street that are closing because they can't pay the rent. And if this area goes down, my business goes down. This area is built upon a destination, and it doesn't work otherwise.
And so you would walk away from your business? How would you do that?
I don't know. I mean, it's what keeps me awake at night. Not having help from the landlord or being able to tap into the CCRA program means that we're paying the entire bill for rent and having zero access to be able to use the space. We're mandated closed at this point, and we'll be open in the third wave probably.
Mm-hmm. So the finance minister is sitting here, and I can ask him a question for you. If you wanted to say something to him, what would it be, Christopher?
Well, if our landlords aren't willing to accept the CCRA program, will the federal government and the provinces give us access directly so that at least we can pay half the rent with the 50% that the government's already set aside for this?
Okay, Christopher, I'll try and get an answer for you. Thank you very much. Take care of yourself. That's Christopher Hudspeth, the owner of a bar called Pegasus on Church, and that's in downtown Toronto. Thanks, Christopher. And let's go back to the Finance Minister, Bill Morneau, for a response to that. So this is, I have to say, something I have heard a lot about over the past number of weeks, the commercial rent program. Either landlords don't want to do it, or the conditions are just too hard for the people that are renting. It frankly doesn't seem to be working. Are you going to make adjustments to the program, and what would you say to Christopher?
Well, I have a lot to say to Christopher because I don't know if you know this, but he's actually in the area I represent. Yes. So it turns out that I've probably met Christopher before.
Yeah, we might have done that on purpose.
You never know. So let me start with the rent program. First, I just want to make sure that I go on the record to say to all the landlords out there, this is a program intended to protect landlords and to help tenants. And so for the landlords out there, we think that they should be moving forward to make use of this program. They're getting guarantee of 75%. Now, I will say that it is early days. All the details for this program have not even been fully announced. They're going to be announced in the coming days. I know how anxious Christopher must be because it is, I'm sure, gnawing at him every moment of every day. But we are going to see more and more businesses sign up for this. I've seen large numbers already. Now, what are we going to try and do? We're going to try and think about all of our programs, making sure they're working. Christopher's been able to take that small business loan, that $40,000 loan, $10,000 of that's forgivable. He's been able to apply for the wage subsidy for his employees, which is a big cost. So we're trying to provide broad-based support for small businesses like his, and we will continue to look at this program. I have been advocating for the provinces to also step up. It's a provincial jurisdiction that we've stepped in because we're trying to find a way to solve for this.
Okay, but it sounds like Christopher's going to lose his business because his landlord's not interested in taking part in the program. There's really no incentive for the landlord to take part in the program, is there?
There's a huge incentive for the landlords.
So what would it be? Because they don't seem to...
Well, what you saw in the newspaper this morning is numbers like landlords getting 15% of the payment last month. So what the landlord gets by taking this is they get 75% of the rent guaranteed. And what that means is that for the tenant, like Christopher, he pays 25%. The landlord is giving a 25% off, but 50% is coming through the federal government, shared with the provinces.
Yeah.
So there's a big incentive. I'm encouraging landlords to do this. I do think, Rosie, there's a lot of challenges, obviously, with every program we put out because we're trying to get them out quickly to solve for the biggest number of people. And as we look at them, we are making adjustments where adjustments can be made. A good example is that business account. 600,000 businesses have applied and gotten the money. but we're still looking at whether we can make more eligible.
I get that you think that's an incentive for landlords, but I would say that landlords could say to their tenants, sorry, go into debt, find a solution. We're not willing to play ball here. And that is largely what I'm hearing right now from people. So I guess other than you appealing to them to do it, I'm wondering what else you can do. I mean, Christopher's idea was not a terrible one. Why not just take the 50% that you're already handing over and just give it right to the people that are renting the properties?
I know people, I get a lot of great ideas every day, and that's one of the things we're trying to take in. That one's actually particularly difficult for us to execute on because we actually aren't responsible for the landlord-tenant situation in the provinces. So it's not actually a federal jurisdiction, whereas the mortgage system is a federal jurisdiction. So that's the reason we came up with this idea the way we did. What I can tell you more broadly is we're looking at every program. We're trying to find ways to get capital to people like Christopher, so loans that can bridge them through this time. I know it's going to be challenging in the business that he's in a bar, restaurant. I'm sure he's worried about when he's going to be able to open up. We're worried too. But I think that we've provided support in multiple ways that are going to help a very large number of businesses.
But you recognize that there are some cracks in programs, and this seems to be one of them.
There are absolutely challenges that we're trying to deal with every single day, and we don't have answers to every one of them the next day, but we're trying to fix them as we go along. And we won't be able to fix everything. We will not be able to get everything perfect, but again, 600,000 businesses have got that small business loan. We're seeing thousands upon thousands of landlords signing up for this rent approach. So we will keep working on it. We will think about ways that we can improve it, make it more accessible, because that's what we're trying to do with all of our programs.
Yeah. Okay, I actually have another question from a viewer on video here about that loan. It comes from Terry Lynn, and this is what she has to say.
Hi guys, my name is Trisha Stuckless and I'm the proud owner and operator of Oola Pet Spa here in Mount Pearl, Newfoundland. My business has been running for 5 years, but recently has had to shut its doors due to the global pandemic COVID-19. My staff members and myself are also on the $500 a week program. My landlord is working with us with the relief program from the government for rental. The government is also offering small business loans that need to be repaid. Unfortunately, that's the part that hurts, is the repayment part for small businesses. Not all small businesses are able to do that. Is there any way the government, instead of offering small loans, are able to offer us grants to get us going again?
Okay, and that's Trisha there at her dog spa. So there again, a recognition that that she's used the loan, she's happy for it, but she's very worried about having to pay it back later.
I understand.
Is that a set in stone policy at this stage too, that it'll only be $10,000 forgivable? Will you commit to re-examining that?
Well, what we've done is we've taken a look at the credit that we're supporting businesses with, and we've made it the least expensive for the smallest of businesses. So for that small business, which I appreciate is going through a tough time, and a lot of the programs are clearly working, they can get a $40,000 loan, as you know, and they can get 25% forgivable. And that loan is interest-free. So it's interest-free for the next couple of years. That is a very, very good set of terms to try and help through. For the bigger businesses, they're getting access to more capital because they need more, but they're on more commercial terms. And for the largest of businesses, it's going to be more expensive. That's the way it should be. But we want to make sure that we are treating people and businesses fairly. So we think that what we've come up with is an approach that is an appropriate size of the grant. We're always looking at whether actually the loan can be applied to a broader range of businesses because we're trying to make sure that we hit them. As I said, it's hit 600,000. For now, what we think is appropriate is the emergency response benefit, that $2,000 a month that the people in that store and that organization are taking, the small business loan. I'm glad to hear that the rent program is working for her and her landlord. And we'll continue looking at this because this is dynamic. Okay,
a couple more questions before I let you go. You've told Canadians time and again, as has the Prime Minister, that we're in a good position to take on debt, and we're certainly doing that now. Our debt is probably nearing trillion at this point. How does that play out, though? And I know what your answer is going to be. We're just trying to get through this period of time. But the reality is, at some point, the government will have to start finding sources of revenue. And that will happen either by taxing people or cutting things. Have you had a moment, think about what that will be? Because Canadians, I think, deserve to know what's coming down the track after we get through this.
Well, more than a moment. I mean, obviously, this is consuming many of us as we think about not only what we're doing, but what the challenges will be after. I think the way I've thought about this from day one is by supporting people and by supporting businesses, we preserve the strength of our economy coming out of this. And so we had a really great fiscal position going into this. We're making significant investments in people and businesses to bridge us through this. So the best way we can come out of this afterwards is if we have a strong economy, if we can actually afford, if we can grow the economy so that we can actually deal with the challenge that we're going to face in getting to a restart. That will be the most important thing.
Right.
We're not thinking about raising taxes. What we're thinking about is preserving our economy for the future, making sure that we can actually get back to a vibrant place.
But are you saying that we can just grow our way out of this massive deficit? And is that what this the direction is? Is that what we're looking for?
What I'm saying right now is the most important thing we can do is to preserve and hopefully enhance our position for afterwards. And so comparatively, if we hadn't made these sorts of investments in people and businesses, we would be in a much more difficult situation. That's the starting point that we want afterwards. And yes, we will face tough choices afterwards. Nobody is saying that this is an easy thing we're going through. No one is saying that we're not making investments that we're going to have to face up to. But the best way we can face up to that is by having that resilient economy afterwards, by getting ourselves back to work. And I have a huge amount of confidence in Canadians, in the education system that we have, our ability to be resilient. And if we can preserve that sort of business sector, we will be in a position to face up to these challenges afterwards.
Okay, one more question, if you don't mind. There has been, as you know, so much talk about long-term care centers in this country. It is really the tragedy of this pandemic. Is this a place where the government will see future health transfers? We know that the provinces have struggled taking on more and more of the spending for healthcare since the 90s. And some of that has meant that they have sort of outsourced care into private homes for long-term care centers, or they've not put enough into those places. It's quite apparent now that that needs to change. Is the federal government prepared to, in some capacity, think about reinvesting some new money into that part of our healthcare system?
Well, I guess let me start just by acknowledging the question. I mean, this is of the things that all of us know is when we open up our newspapers or see the TV, this is just a huge and growing problem. Any of us who know people in old age care centers, people who are there right now, are feeling so anxious. We know there's a problem. We know that we're going to have to get at that problem. I will tell you that right now we're very focused on the more immediate. And the reason we put that low income essential worker fund to the provinces is to deal with the immediate, to deal with getting through this challenging time. When it settles down, we are going to need to sit down together and think about how we reform this system. And I think that it would be premature for me to tell you that I know how that's going to work out, but it clearly is going to be something that's going to be on all of our minds, and it's a responsibility that we're all going to need to take seriously because it's clearly a failure in our system, and we're going to face up to it.
Just to go back to something you said about not raising taxes, just so I can make that really clear to Canadians. So there would be no increase to the GST, for instance. That's not on the table.
Well, let me just say that is not what we're thinking about right now. We are thinking about preserving our economy so we can be strong afterwards. And I know that people will ask questions like, give me the details of what's going to happen in 2022. Well, you know, that would be very presumptuous for me to tell you that, but I can tell you that we know that we had a strong place going into this. We knew we had a really good fiscal position, better than any other G7 country. We know that preserving our economy to come out of this is going to make us stronger. And we know that we're going to need to face up to those challenges. And we also recognize that raising taxes is not what Canadians want us to do. So we are going to need to face up to it. We're going to need to think about how we deal with that challenge.
And I'm certainly not asking you to make decisions now. I get that there's lots of unknowns and we're still trying to understand how this is going to go on. But if you're not going to raise taxes and that's not the direction you go in, then obviously spending has to be tightened in some way.
There will be challenges, Rosie. You and I both know it. And the best way we can deal with the challenges is by dealing with what's immediately facing the people who were asking questions today, so that they can, whether it's Nim, she can get a job when this is through, or whether it's Chris, that he still has his establishment when it's through, so that we can pick up where we left off and have a strong economy so that we can get back to business and support our families. That's the fundamental thing we're trying to achieve here. And then we'll face up to those tough questions together afterwards.
Okay, I know you're a very busy man. You're probably not sleeping much, and I do appreciate you making the time very much.
Well, it's great to be here.
And Canadians appreciate it too. Thank you very much. That's Finance Minister Bill Morneau. All right. Let's go over to Duncan now, who, of course, is monitoring some of your questions and things you might be saying and other questions you might have for guests coming up. Duncan.
Rosie, as you said earlier, this is not our normal kind of town hall. Here in the atrium, it is deadly quiet. There's no one here. But I'll tell you, online, there are all kinds of Canadians who are weighing in, sharing their opinions, sharing their concerns about the economy. When you talked with Nim Calvez, laid off hotel worker there, lots of people expressing concern about women in particular. I mean, we know that women are being adversely impacted by this in the retail, the food, the accommodation, office support workers. Those sectors have really been hard hit, and hitting women in particular. And so we're getting lots of comments about that. Also, when you were talking with the Finance Minister, Bill Morneau, about landlords and landlords stepping up, Michelle Johnson on Facebook weighed in and said this: landlords should step up, take the 75%. Chances are you're going to get zero if these places go bankrupt. Stay safe, everybody. I will say, you know, people trying to keep a stiff upper lip, but there are people very, very worried right now. Garrison Hill sent us a tweet and said this: no straight answer from Bill, but you tried. I am a 25-year veteran in the Canadian music industry, and we are decimated. Projections are 18 to 24 months before we can work. Many are sole proprietors, so there is no wage subsidy, just CERB. Help. And certainly on Cross Country Checkup, I mean, last week we were talking about the arts sector and how hard they've been hit. Toronto resident sent us this tweet right here, said, imagine if citizens didn't get funding for daily living expenses. Hashtag be grateful right now. It could be worse. So, you know, some people trying to put a brave face on it, but let's check in. We want to see just how folks are doing right across the country. With the May long weekend coming up, it kind of marks the unofficial start of summer. This year, though, of course, it will be a lot different than usual. CBC News has been asking Canadians right across the country what they're expecting from the season. So first up, Vancouver, where the weather is already pretty summer-like.
I think we're going to see much of what we've seen on all our sunny weekends right through the COVID-19 crisis. People will be gathering in places like this, and they won't be traveling very far, but they will be gathering.
Honestly, I don't think too much is going to change for a little bit, so I'm kind of expecting where we're at now to just kind of be going on for the rest of the summer.
We hope that they maintain the distancing and the simple things and relax and encourage the outdoors activity.
Honestly, I think people are just getting sick of it, and I think it's going to be a pretty normal summer, but I think the social distancing thing will still be in place, but slowly things are starting to open up.
I kind of expect that life is pretty much not going to change a whole lot, to be honest. I do think that we'll probably still keep veering away from one another on the sidewalks for a while, but otherwise I don't actually see things are going to change that much.
Oh, I'm hoping that COVID just goes away. No more COVID. COVID gone forever. That's what I'm hoping.
I'm hoping people will figure out how to slow down, stop, take a little bit of a gander at the world that's around them in a whole new light.
Stay safe, everybody. This is temporary, and we got this, baby. Keep it up.
Rosie, I can't help but look at those pictures and say, my goodness, it's so beautiful and warm there in Vancouver. But it does give us a sense of how, you know, different regions across the country are really shifting at different paces in terms of back to normal, if you will.
They sure are, and I have to say that last guy is way more hopeful than I am, and some of that should rub off on me. Yeah, it's good. It's good to hear Canadians are feeling, okay about the future. Of course.
Of course, Rosie, we're going to have lots more from our viewers and listeners across the country throughout the evening. You can send us your questions about reopening the economy. We've got Calgary Mayor Naheed Nenshi coming up, and Toronto Mayor John Tory. So if you've got something specific for them, send it along. I'll be keeping my eye on our Twitter accounts. Or you can email us covid@cbc.ca or leave a note on our Facebook live stream on the CBC News page. I'll be monitoring those throughout the evening.
All right, cool. Looking forward to hearing from more Canadians. As we know, the Prime Minister says his government's economic measures are, as you heard there from Bill Morneau, really an attempt to bridge to better times when the economy is ready to come roaring back. Well, the CBC's Peter Armstrong has a look at a potential recovery and why that bounce back may be pretty difficult.
Rosie, I'm on Queen Street in the west end of downtown Toronto, and on a normal spring sunny day, these sidewalks would be absolutely packed. These stores would be full. And the big question being asked now isn't just when will the stores open, but when will consumers go back out and start to spend? Because sure, you can flip a switch and reopen the stores, but convincing Canadians to go back out and start spending and meeting a friend for lunch and going to a show on a Friday night, well, that's complicated. And remember just how important consumer spending is to the broader Canadian economy. Go back to 2008, 2009, the financial crisis. It was consumers that really saved the day. Policymakers lowered interest rates and encouraged us to borrow and spend. And we did in record numbers. But in doing so, we took on record levels of debt as well. And this crisis has shown just how vulnerable households and Canadians really were with all that debt. We have nearly 8 million Canadians have applied for federal relief and federal aid. Even those who haven't lost their jobs or their wages have been shown just how exposed they are. And, will they be more inclined maybe this time to save rather than go back out and spend, especially as we know the health crisis may linger for some time. And all of this matters because the longer it takes for us to go back out and spend, the longer it will take for the economy to recover, the longer it will take for these employers to rehire some of those laid off workers. And the longer that takes, the longer this crisis goes, and the more it deepens, and the harder it is for us to get out of it. Rose.
All right, thanks for that, Peter. Lots to think about there. So we're going to talk to a Canadian who has managed to actually save money during the pandemic and even pay down some debt. Ron Porteous works for Canada Post, and he joins me from his home outside Ottawa. Hi, Ron.
Hi, Rosemary.
So you're obviously one of the lucky Canadians who still has a job, and maybe you've been working from home. Is that what's happened to you?
Yeah, I think my last day at work was March 13th, so I've been working at home ever since then, and my wife as well has been working from home most days. So we're both very fortunate that we're able to work, but doing it from home.
Yeah, so you're right, very fortunate, and I feel that way too about still having a job and not having to worry about that. But you did decide to take this time and tackle some debt, and I'm just wondering how you managed to do that and how successful you've been.
Well, I'd love to say we had some great master plan to do it, but we sort of stumbled into it. About a month ago, we looked at our credit card bill, and it was about a quarter of what it normally would be, and that raised some eyebrows. And then we paid it off and looked at our bank account and realized that we were not deficit financing this month, that we in fact had a significant amount of money that we could start paying down some debt. So that sort of changed our focus, and we've been working at doing that ever since.
And where has all this money come from? Have you been able to assess why you suddenly have more money to pay things down?
Well, we live south of Ottawa, so our commute is about 140 kilometers round trip every day. So a lot of it is saving on gas and just that spending that you do when you're not really being conscious of it, going to Tim Hortons and going out to places like that. We're just not in those positions anymore, so we're just not spending that money.
So you were working at home, you're still getting a paycheck, you've got this new plan to pay down your debt. Has anything else in your life changed because of the fact that you have essentially nowhere really to spend money?
Well, I'm sort of creeping slowly towards retirement, and we'd always been talking about how we needed to learn to live on less money for retirement. So we're sort of seeing now this has pushed us to try that exercise out. So I bought Quicken the other day, and I've been putting in all of our bills and everything. We're actually starting to pay attention to our finances now, which we really weren't doing very well before.
Who would have thought a pandemic would bring that change to your house, eh?
Yeah, it was a bit of a surprise, but we have to do what we can, I guess.
Well, I'm glad you're doing well, Ron, and I'm glad you still got a job and you're all doing healthy at your house. Thanks so much for joining us. That's Ron Porteous, just joining us from outside Ottawa. Thanks, Ron.
Thanks very much.
Nice to chat with you. Well, travel, as you may know, that's probably one of the reasons Ron has a little extra cash, is very much off the table for everyone right now. And for places that rely on tourism, and there are so many of them, of course, in this country, the impact will be devastating. That includes Newfoundland, where so many businesses depend on summer visitors. Well, the CBC's Anthony Germain is in St. John's.
Well, thanks, Rosemary. This is Petty Harbour, a historic community about 15 minutes from St. John's. And like hundreds of other places, it should be getting ready for a busy tourism season. More people visit here annually than actually live here, and 2020 was supposed to be a record breaker, but instead, COVID-19 is shattering the entire industry. Well, many Canadians and people around the world have seen the award-winning ads, and they worked, seducing visitors to make the effort to come to this remote province and grow tourism into a billion-dollar industry. Even small villages started to get attention.
As you know, I'm running for mayor of Dildo.
But now, efforts to cash in on free publicity courtesy of an American heavyweight celebrity seem pointless. A lost opportunity for people like Angie Reid.
Well, it was our $11 million free advertising campaign that he ran for us. We put a lot of preparation, a lot of time, a lot of money into the coming season based on the hype that we had last summer.
And in the city of St. John's, George Street, 2 blocks of jam-packed mischief and sin, a popular magnet for party people looking for music, drink, food, and whatever. Well, this is George Street now, vacant during the day and night. Unlike other Canadian cities that can rely on locals if and when they reopen, the bars and restaurants here rely on tourism to keep them afloat all year round. There's certain pride here and resilience in facing adversity, but there's just no way that the industry will get anywhere close to the $1.6 billion that we're expected. The COVID curtain has even fallen on Come From Away, the smash hit about how this province welcomed international flights during the darkness of 9/11, a story about Newfoundland openness and generosity. And because of the pandemic, instead of embracing people who come from away, we're saying stay away. And if you don't, police armed with new pandemic powers can search you without a warrant and escort you away from this province. Anthony Germain, CBC News, Petty Harbour.
Heartbreaking to see George Street so empty, but that is the reality for so many cities across this country. And part of it, of course, is because the airline industry is not operating in any substantial way, and that has had a devastating effect. Air Canada, for instance, lost more than $1 billion in the first quarter. WestJet laid off 3,000 employees last month, and some of those employees will be hired back with the wage subsidy programs, but travel still is going to be an issue. And as you can imagine, smaller airlines are just struggling to survive. Joe Sparling is the CEO of Air North, and he joins me now from Whitehorse. Hi, Joe. Nice to see you.
Hi, nice to see you.
So when I hear that Air Canada lost $1 billion in the first quarter, I can't imagine what that means for a small business like Air North.
Well, it's tough on every Canadian business for sure, and it's tough on airlines in particular. I think that Canada's a large country with a small population, so the airline network is awfully important to every Canadian, and I think it sometimes gets taken for granted. I sometimes think of the airline industry like the power company. You know, people get used to turning the lights on, and they don't really pay a lot of attention to it. But if the power company, for example, lost 85% of its customers overnight and had to shut down or curtail services, people would notice in a big hurry. And I think the impact is similar with airlines. And, you know, again, going back to the power company, they'd have to, they couldn't possibly generate enough revenue to pay for all of their fixed costs with only 5% of their customers. And, you know, we're in kind of the same boat. So we've all of the airlines in the country are looking for help.
So tell me first of all, I guess, how things have changed. Are you operating any flights at all out of Air North?
Oh, we are, yes. The first thing we did when the pandemic hit is we cut back from 30 scheduled flights a week to only 9. And actually, we cut back to only 5 and then immediately heard from the hospital and the Territorial Emergency Measures Organization that the capacity cutback was too much, and in order to efficiently move medical supplies and people, they needed more flights. So we added back some capacity, and we're now struggling with trying to meet overhead expenses out of greatly reduced flying.
Yeah. I was going to say, I mean, it's sort of different. Your situation is different because not only is it for people to move around the vast country, but also to get goods, I would imagine, up north and to more remote communities. And has there been any essential supports given to you because you also play that role for much of Northern Canada?
Yes, the territorial governments, all 3 territorial governments, I think, immediately recognized the role that northern air carriers play in their economies, serving some communities, many communities that don't have road access at all, and communities that often don't have paved runways. So northern air carriers, I think, fill a niche in the air travel sector that was recognized, and there is some funding under the Northern Essential Air Services program that's helping all of the northern carriers to at least defray, meet some of their expenses and make it easier for us all to survive. We're also taking advantage of the wage subsidy program, and the Yukon government in particular has a couple of other programs that are helping us to get by.
So Joe, just let me end on this. How do you feel about the future? You're the CEO of Air North. I can see that you're struggling. How are you feeling about how this is going to go forward?
Well, uncomfortable, but confident that we're going to get through it. I think air travel is going to be slow to recover. I think that it will be necessary to extend probably some of the aid programs for longer than maybe was first considered. But I think that the impacts of the pandemic are going to carry on for longer than people anticipated, in particular for the airline industry. We're going to come out of this a lot smaller than when we went in. There's no doubt about that. And it's going to take a number of years to get back to anywhere near the size we were at before the pandemic.
Okay, Joe Sparling, good of you to make the time, and I wish you all the best and good health, sir. Thank you.
Thank you. Same to you.
All right, that's Joe Sparling, CEO of Air North, and he spoke to us from Whitehorse. On that note, we'll go check in again with Duncan to see what you are saying to all of us and if you've got other questions. Duncan.
Kind of remarkable to hear Ron Porteous there talking about, tackling debt during a pandemic. And again, very fortunate those of us who haven't lost work. But there are people online here during the program who are trying to look at the silver lining here. Betty Donterman on Twitter said this, the people who are working from home can save money by not needing transit, parking, lunches, dinners at restaurants, movies, etc. They are doing well. And there's a conversation that's going on online right now about changing our habits and whether or not we are taking this opportunity during the pandemic, Canadians right across the country, to change our consumption habits. Josiane Ochman on Twitter said, was hoping for a radical shift in thinking, especially regarding consumer spending. A lot of the stuff we buy does not really benefit local economies. We need to think smaller, local, buy more on the basis of real need rather than reckless want. There's also a concern, I would say, being expressed by many when we talk about the economy of a possibility of a second wave. Certainly we, as businesses are starting to slowly reopen again, there is a concern that there may be a second wave of COVID infections and that those reopened businesses are going to have to close again. And so Angela Angus said this on Facebook, yes, too early to open up restrictions for social distancing, stay home and stay safe. So lots of folks giving us their thoughts, and we have been trying to check in with our cameras with people right across the country. We heard from Vancouver earlier. Summer is coming. It won't be like years past. We played you some tape a few minutes ago of Canadians in Vancouver talking about their expectations, but we also spoke to people in Edmonton.
I'm hoping in this summer to go to Banff to see the nature, and I want this coronavirus situation to get over as soon as possible so that we can hang out with our friends, go for camping and all.
This summer, you know, I'm kind of optimistic.
I'm gonna be outdoors enjoying it with my family and supporting all the local businesses that need help, and also, you know what, just reconnecting with friends and family.
This is the first time I've ever been through something like this, so you don't know what to expect.
Yeah, you're absolutely right.
I'm feeling hopeful.
Again, nice to hear some of that hopeful optimism, but the fellow that was talking there about being outside, I mean, there are people that are would like to go camping, for example, but here in Ontario, the Crown land is closed. People wondering if that'll happen. What about summer camps? I mean, that's a real question as well. Are the kids going to be able to go outside this summer?
Yeah, it's very hard to plan for the summer, that's for sure. I think perhaps a wading pool in your backyard might be your best investment as the summer moves forward.
Yeah. Of course, we'd love to hear more from you. I'll keep bringing you the questions and the comments that you send us, our viewers and listeners. In a bit, we'll be talking about reopening with New Brunswick Premier Blaine Higgs. If you have a question for him, you can send it to us via Twitter or you can email covid@cbc.ca or leave a note on our Facebook live stream. Lots of people commenting on our live stream on the CBC News page.
Okay, I hope everyone feels like this is a town hall because it's hard. It's
We're
virtual,
doing our best.
But it's here. We're doing our best.
I'm doing our best.
It's not the same as everyone being in a room together, but we're trying to recreate the excitement of a town hall. All right, let's turn now to Alberta, because obviously the crisis in Alberta has been twofold, really, or maybe even bigger. It's fighting outbreaks of COVID-19 just like the rest of us, but the whole province is dealing with plummeting oil prices. And Calgary is really at the center of both of those battles. Mayor Naheed Nenshi joins me now on our virtual town hall from Calgary. Good to see you, Mayor.
Great to see you, Rosemary. First time I've done a town hall in a corner of my kitchen.
Well, there's a first time for everything, and that's what we're experiencing with all of this, that's for sure, Mayor. So first of all, just let me ask how the city is doing, because as I said, you've been hit by multiple waves here, not to mention the cancellation of the Stampede, which is a huge economic driver for you as well.
Yeah, really, it's been a triple whammy for us. As you say, we've been hit by the public health crisis like everybody, though Calgary is one of the nation's hotspots. We've had the largest workplace outbreak, I think, in North America in the Cargill meat plant in High River, just south of Calgary, but many of the workers live in Calgary and commute every day. Number two is the global recession and the general hit to storefront business, but also to a lot of businesses that are important to Calgary. I was excited to hear the Edmontonian just now saying she wants to come to Banff for sometime this summer. Our travel and tourism industry, which is very important to us, has been just decimated. And so that's the second part. And then the third part, as you say, is what's been going on in the energy world in this ridiculous price war on oil and gas. So economically, dealing with public health, it's fair to say that Calgary is probably hit harder than just about anywhere else in the developed world. That said, Calgarians have been great at managing this. We've been able to flatten the curve. We've been able to look after one another. And there's been a lot of just good-heartedness in the city. I've been talking a lot about clean hands, clear heads, and open hearts. And Calgarians have been great about all three.
So I know today, though, there was some reopening plans announced by Premier Kenney, and Calgary and Brooks, outside of Calgary, are not going to be on the same path at all as the rest of the province because there are still so many cases there. How do you feel about that the pace of things is going to be really different in Calgary than the rest of the province?
You know, it was the right thing to do. I wish it hadn't come sort of at the 11th hour, 3:30 on Wednesday afternoon when people were thinking about Thursday. But ultimately, we have to make decisions based on the right evidence. And the challenge in Calgary is partially there's still more cases, but it's more so that there's more community transmission. And it's really important that we have to get that under control. So retailers, we never closed shops in Alberta. You could still be open for curbside delivery, curbside pickup and delivery, I should say. But tomorrow, most retailers will be able to open across the province, including in Calgary, with restrictions. Many daycares will be open with restrictions. But the other two big ones, which were restaurants and hairstylists, we all need it right now, which were supposed to open tomorrow, will be delayed another 10 days.
Right. Okay, well, it's good you're taking that in stride. I know, too, though, that the city, you've had to lay off a lot of employees because of the pressures on the city. I know transit has been hit, as it has in many large cities. What can the federal government do to step in? We've asked the Prime Minister that question on multiple occasions, and it seems to be the answer is, well, this is a provincial jurisdiction. But I wonder if there is not something that could be done for cities in a short-term way.
There has to be. And I was really excited to hear Premier Ford, the Premier of Ontario today, say he wants to come to the table with the federal government. Because look, every one of the large cities is in a big problem. Here in Calgary, we're losing about $15 million a week. By the end of this year, we'll have a deficit between $250 and $400 million. And we can't easily run a deficit. We're not like the province or the federal government. And we don't have access to the same sources of capital. So given that we're going to have to borrow money across the system anyway, it makes the most sense for that money to be borrowed by the orders of government that are getting 0% interest right now and that have access to markets in ways the cities don't. Calgary's a big place, right? It's bigger than 5 provinces, but we're just not used to borrowing for this working capital the way that others have. So ultimately, the federal government cannot abandon us to the provinces because some provinces don't have the capacity to help and some don't want to help.
Right.
And the provinces cannot abandon us to the federal government because ultimately they're responsible for us. So we've got to have a tripartite solution, and people have to set aside politics and history and just solve the problem.
And do you feel like that's going to happen? It doesn't sound like you seem super optimistic that you're going to get there.
You know, this is an endless game, right? And I've been saying this for all the years I've been in politics, that the easiest thing we can do in politics is to pass the hat. That's a provincial responsibility. That's a federal responsibility. That's a municipal responsibility. At the end of the day, we all serve the same citizens. And I feel like the leadership federally and in some provinces like Premier Ford today do understand the issue. I think that a lot of folks who perhaps represent different parts of the country that are hurt in different ways or less so really need to understand how this is now a national problem. 80% of citizens live in cities, and every city is in trouble.
Right. Okay, Mayor, sorry we're coming to you under such difficult circumstances, but you do seem to have a nice kitchen, and hang in there. We'll talk again.
One of these days, I'll put some art on these red walls. Thank you so very much for doing this, for having this town hall. And I just want to remind people that this is about keeping everyone in the community safe. You know, do everything you can to avoid spreading the virus. Clean hands, it's still important. Clear heads, make thoughtful decisions about every action you take for others. And most important, open hearts. Physical distancing doesn't mean social isolation. We need to reach out to everyone in the community. And number one is we reopen, whether you like it or not, whether you want us to do it or not. Number one, be kind to everyone. Be kind to businesses that open, be kind to businesses that don't, be kind to all of your neighbors. That's how we're going to get through this together.
Mayor, good message. Thank you so much for making the time. Stay healthy and good luck to the city there.
Thank you. Stay safe.
All right, nice to see you. All right, that's Mayor Naheed Nenshi, the Mayor of Calgary, of course. Well, we've got someone who experienced firsthand a little bit of what the Mayor was talking about there, because as you may well know, jobs are drying up in the oil patch, throwing many people out of work, in part because of that global oil dispute, but in part, of course, because of the pandemic, too. Andrew Ivany is from Newfoundland, but he did work in Alberta. He was part of that fly-in, fly-out community. Feeling unsafe, he left his job and drove across the country to get home, and he joins me from Portugal Cove, St. Philip's, Newfoundland. Good to see you, Andrew.
Hey, how you doing this evening?
I'm good. So tell me what happened. You were working where in Alberta, and how did you decide that this wasn't going to be a good decision anymore?
Well, it all came down. We were just south of Red Deer working on a well. It was the last well pretty much of the season. Spring breakup was upon us, and then this whole COVID thing came about. So yeah, after that, it was the last well, and we knew that was it for a while anyway. So I figured it was a good time to head back to the East Coast, seeing that the numbers of COVID were growing pretty rapidly in Alberta.
Yeah. Now, you decided not to fly, though. Tell me how you got back to Newfoundland.
I was talking to a friend of mine, Rocky, who also works in the oil field, and he had decided to buy a car. So we went to Calgary and bought a car and just decided to drive, make a trip out of it. Figured it'd be a little safer.
So now you're out of work, and is there a prospect of work? Would you go back to Alberta if? Oh,
absolutely. I was speaking with my field supervisor just yesterday, actually, and he said there's some work coming up. I mean, there's still road bans and everything as well in Alberta, so and spring breakup and stuff. So there's a lot of factors contributing to the loss of work, and depends on different services as well, right? Some services are not going to be moving as much as others, but there is potential of some swabbing rigs and such going back. So things will come around.
The federal government put a lot of money into the orphan well cleanup. Is that something you'd be interested in getting to do if you were to go back?
Like the abandonments. I guess, well, I've done quite a few abandonments all winter. I mean, that seems like that's where most of the money's going towards, is abandoning old wells.
So how are you coping right now? Are you living on savings? Have you applied for the CERB? What are you doing?
Well, I got some savings from the winter, and also on that fund, that $2,000 or whatever. So yeah, I'm just staying low key, just trying to get through this, just like everyone else. It's tough.
And how are you thinking about the summer or the months ahead? Are you feeling good about things? Still worried? Just give me a sense of how you're feeling about it.
I'm always optimistic. There's always light at the end of the tunnel. So I'm just going to be out doing a lot of kayaking and fishing and stuff, and just being out in nature. So that's usually what I do.
That doesn't sound terrible at all, Andrew. Thank you so much for making the time.
It doesn't. It's pretty socially distant, the places I go.
All right, Andrew, nice to meet you. Thank you, and good luck. I hope you do get back out to Alberta. I'm sure they miss all of you Newfoundlanders who were doing the back and forth.
And we miss them.
Very good. Thanks, Andrew. That's Andrew Ivany in Portugal Cove, St. Philip's, Newfoundland. All right, let's go back to Duncan to see what Canadians are telling us right now.
Lots of Canadians like Andrew just trying to make the best with the cards they've been dealt. And the conversation is continuing about the kind of changes that people are making in their own consumption habits. DKS on Twitter said this situation has made me and my family rethink where we buy our goods from, what changes we need to make going forward to support our local businesses and our country as a whole, and we will be making some big changes. Gilda Gelvena on Twitter said this, the best way for businesses to get a good kickstart during reopening would be to boost consumers' confidence on their health and safety. So, of course, people who are starting to go back to the retail stores want to make sure that they're going to be safe when they do so. We've had a chance to send our cameras out as safely as possible to talk with residents. We've been checking in with Canadians this evening about their plans for what they're going to be doing there for a very different summer. We've heard from people in Vancouver and Edmonton, and let's have a look at what a few people here in Toronto told us.
Hopefully get some more family time, ideally up at the cottage where it's a little bit more comfortable and relaxing.
We had a bunch of plans, like festivals. I think this year we cannot trust this kind of big festivals because it's not safe anymore, at least this year.
I'm originally from Istanbul. I had to go to see my family, but everything is cancelled now.
I think that for the summer, my only expectations were that we'll be able to go to parks and be outside, but definitely not any big gatherings like festivals or maybe large parties or clubs for that matter.
Of course, everybody has plans during summertime, but I think the best thing for now is to save our life, and we just need to be home and stay safe, which is more important than our plans. I think we just stay indoors. It's the best.
We're now into our second hour of our CBC News virtual town hall special called Living with COVID, as we are all trying to do right now and will be doing for the next number of months. I'm Rosemary Barton. We're obviously taking a close look at how the pandemic has changed life in Canada and what kind of new normal, whatever that is, we can expect in the months ahead.
We are live on CBC News Network and CBC Radio 1, where we're streaming around the world on our online platforms, CBCNews.ca, CBC Gem, and the CBC News app. And of course, we want to hear from you. You can tweet me and Rosemary or email us at covid@cbc.ca or leave a note on our very lively Facebook live stream on the CBC News page right now. And I'll come back in a little while with your comments in a bit.
Okay, and we are actually reading them, so please keep sending them so we get a sense of where everybody's heads is at these days. Over the next hour, we're, as we said, going to talk about the path forward. I'll be talking to the Premier of New Brunswick. We'll also talk to the Mayor of Canada's biggest city in Toronto. In both of those places, and in fact, most of Canada, there is some kind of reopening happening right now, but very strict rules. And what that looks like really depends entirely on where you live in this country.
Manitoba and Quebec have taken some of the most aggressive approaches, but they're still very different. On May 4th, Manitoba started reopening non-essential businesses like hair salons, retail stores, dentists, and restaurant patios. Next month, it hopes to let people dine in, too. Quebec, with the most cases in the country, is split. On one side, the Greater Montreal area still largely locked down as COVID cases climb. But in the rest of the province, not only are many retail stores open, elementary schools are too, though attendance is voluntary. Next door, Ontario, with the second highest case count, is moving more slowly. Garden centres can be open, some retail stores do curbside pickup, and you can now walk in provincial parks. Nova Scotia also being cautious, so far only opening garden centres, parks, trails, and golf driving ranges. Saskatchewan and Alberta put non-urgent medical services at the top of the restart list. In Saskatchewan, dentists, chiropractors, and optometrists can see clients. Alberta has given the green light to non-urgent surgeries. And a big priority for many provinces, lengthening a list of who you can hang out with. New Brunswick and Newfoundland and Labrador expanded their household bubbles last month. PEI will now let 5 people from different households gather outside. And in time for the long weekend, up to 6 people will be able to gather in BC. The Northwest Territories hopes to start reopening Friday as long as the situation remains stable and testing is available, allowing social circles to widen and schools to open. Yukon's plan is coming soon, and Nunavut, the only region that hasn't had a case, says it's too early to ease its restrictions.
So New Brunswick, as you saw there, it has started to ease some restrictions because it's one of the lowest COVID-19 case counts in the country. There were only 2 active cases at last check, and it hasn't reported a new case in nearly a week now. The province is in phase 2 of its recovery plan, and Premier Blaine Higgs is the Premier of New Brunswick, and he's in Fredericton. Good to see you, Premier.
Good evening, Rosemary.
So we're all very jealous of how New Brunswick has done this. Where are you at now? Are there any active cases right now?
We have 2 cases, both confirmed to be travel-related, and that's been that way for the last roughly a week.
So how do you explain the success of New Brunswick?
Well, I guess, we got into this early. As I've made previous comments about our Minister of Education was very proactive in identifying kind of a world issue that was coming our way, given his kind of in-depth knowledge in that field. Mm-hmm. We reacted quickly with school closures. After March break, we didn't let kids that were traveling, some in Italy that came back and said, you can't come to our schools. And then we shut down the schools right after March break. And we then proceeded to shut down activities within the province very quickly, and then started watching our borders diligently.
So you are now already in phase 2 of reopening, which again, I think makes a lot of people envious of where you're at. How is that going? Because I think now you've got some restaurants open, you've got some daycares open. How are people doing adapting to this living with COVID, but being able to do some normal things too?
Well, so far so good, and mind you, it was like flicking a switch when last Friday when we announced a change into phase 2, and all of a sudden you saw more activity within the cities, on the highways, but we're finding and what has been a success to date, not only certainly in all, excuse me, all the first line workers, but in relation to the actual citizens and business owners that have been very compliant, very diligent about the social distancing, the washing hands, the preparation of the facilities. So we're expecting that same thing during the retail openings. And thus far, if we continue in the way we have been, and the diligence continues, I'm confident that we can continue on this path within our own province at this point. Because first is having the movement within our own province.
So you've said that a couple times, and those two cases, as you said, were travel related. I know you've got some very strong feelings about your borders. So let's talk first of all about what that means for travel for Canadians or neighbors in Canada who want to come to New Brunswick in the months ahead. Is that on the table at all?
Well, if we talk in the months ahead, then possibly, but in the weeks ahead, no, it isn't possible. We are doing essential travel only. We know businesses, there will be contracts, there will be activities economically that will happen. Essential services have been happening and will continue, but the coming for visitation, the coming for non-essential, we'll continue to stop cars at the border, understand where and why you're coming. We have traffic that moves through our province en route to PEI or en route to Nova Scotia or Newfoundland. So we would continue to allow that, but we need to know that travel is very much understood and it's very much controlled, because we don't want to lose where we are, and we know how quickly it could all be lost.
Well, and I'm thinking of the other big border that you share too, and that of course is with the United States. And I know as many as 200,000 Americans travel through various points at New Brunswick, and we all know what's happening in the United States. It continues to be a troubling spot. How worried are you about the Canada-U.S. border? What have you told your fellow premiers or the Prime Minister about that?
So we've been, certainly I've been very clear, and I think it's generally the agreement across the country that we want to have a border of security between us and the United States, other than commercial traffic, and we've had that. I think our border traffic may be down at one of our main ports of entry by down by about 80%. So but commercial traffic is still moving, supplies and goods are still moving, and they'll continue, and they must. But to have the routine, tourism traffic is going to be a big loss this summer. We know that. So we're working with local provinces, what can we do? And as they, ramp up, and as they have similar categories of the health concerns that we have and of the same conditions, then maybe we can work together more closely.
So what does that mean? You could maybe bubble with another province potentially, and someone could come there for summer holidays?
Yeah, that's right. We could, and that bubbling thing has worked out very well, and it has allowed some social interaction between families. A little tense when you have more than 2 or 3 siblings, and you got to pick one. But in my case, it was okay. I only had one daughter that's living in the province and was a grandchild, so that worked. But it gets to be a little tense in that sense. But with another province, I've had discussions with then the Premier King of PEI. Today we had a call with the other Atlantic premiers talking about timing and all that. It'll be a few weeks out, 2 months, I would say, into probably at the end of June, July.
All right. Well, that's something for everyone to look forward to. Just as other parts of the country, not as far along as New Brunswick is, watch you and are hearing you talk about crazy things like going to restaurants, what would you say to other Canadians as they are sort of struggling to hang on to these still some fairly tough restrictions in many parts of the country?
Well, there certainly is hope, and there will be life after COVID. It'll be a little different, but we're blessed here in the Maritimes and in New Brunswick. We don't have the big cities to contend with, like in Quebec with Montreal and in Toronto and Ontario. It's a different scenario. So we're able to manage in a different way. But we will survive this, and I am convinced that our country is going to come out of this stronger and more united. I see it in our own province. I see us looking at areas of like food security and a national interest of how we support one another. Interprovincial trade, which has only been talked about in the last number of years, I think will become much more of a reality and a necessity, because I think people want Canada to be stronger.
All right, Premier, good words to leave it on. Thank you so much. And again, good luck to everyone in New Brunswick. Let them know that we're envious and hoping it all works out there as well.
Thank you very much. Have a good evening.
All right. You too. That's the Premier of New Brunswick, Blaine Higgs. It does. When you talk about bubbling with another family, bubbling with a whole province opens up a whole new door of potential holidays you could take. But I don't think Ontario is quite there yet. Duncan, I know you've got some more thoughts from Canadians.
Yeah, some people reacting to Calgary Mayor Naheed Nenshi talking about his haircut and hoping to get a haircut soon. You know, I think there are a lot of Canadians who would like to do something with their bucket. Here's a different perspective, though. Mohamed on Twitter said this: "I'm a hairstylist in Ontario, not anxious to get back and take the chance of giving or catching this virus. COVID-19 is just such a mystery." And of course, very difficult for hairstylists to do any sort of physical distancing. Premier Higgs, of course, talking about New Brunswick's plans to go back. And I think what is happening online here is a reflection of what's happening right across the country. It's the great reopening debate, if you want to call it that. Robert Park on Twitter sent this: "We have no business looking at reopening when we have not been able to handle testing and PPE properly, establish adequate inventory and stable supply chains first for citizens, and then look at reopening. Safety should be paramount." Doran Berger on Facebook says, "The biggest risk to return to normalcy is that this whole thing is making us forget what life was like before. We're creatures of habit, and habits are hard to break. The longer this goes, the longer we are not getting back to normal." So again, people, of course, we're talking about the economy here, Rosemary, but people talking about normalcy and really wondering what that's going to mean. So it's a big question for everybody. This is a live town hall, of course, and I am reading people that are getting to us in contact directly. We'd want to hear from you. We are focusing on Toronto in a little bit, and we'll be joined in a moment by Mayor John Tory. So send us your questions via Twitter, or you can tweet either one of us. You can send us an email to covid@cbc.ca or join the conversation on our Facebook Live page.
It's sort of like cross-country checkup, but it's at night, and there's TV involved.
And there's TV. Normally I wear a tux on cross-country checkup.
I had no idea. Okay, hopefully some people will weigh in on what they want to hear from the mayor, because as we know, this epidemic, this pandemic has hit different parts of the country differently. And yes, cities have been hit differently because of the density of the populations. This country's large urban centers face really a big challenge when it comes to trying to figure out how to reopen, how to maintain that physical distancing, whether it be on transit, in shopping malls, even just crowded sidewalks. Here's Dwight Drummond, the host of CBC News Toronto, on how Canada's largest city is getting ready to reopen.
Rosemary, in recent days, things have shifted in Ontario. We are now talking about the province actually starting to reopen and what it might look like with more than just a few people out on these streets. The answers to those questions are complicated. Take the Greater Toronto Area with its 6 million people. It will be no simple matter to open up shopping malls, businesses, and office towers while still respecting physical distancing.
We've got their order already packed up and ready to go.
This week, as a first step, Ontario allowed some businesses to offer curbside pickup. Leah Isles was already providing shipping discounts as a way of attracting customers to her gift shop.
Doing what we could to adapt and get people to continue shopping with us and supporting small business.
Many businesses like dental offices remain closed. These days, dentists like Peter and Casa are being fitted for new protective equipment as they prepare for a very different workplace.
So the appearance is going to be quite different. Your dentist, unfortunately, is not going to look the same way as your dentist did.
Tomorrow, the Ontario government is promising more details on the next businesses to reopen. But Ontario's premier is emphasizing that returning to normal in this province will only happen slowly and cautiously. Dwight Drummond, CBC News, Toronto.
And the mayor of Toronto, John Tory, joins us now from Toronto. Hello, Mayor. Good to see you.
Hey, Rosie.
Thanks for making the time. You heard there Dwight at the end say the Premier was going to announce some details tomorrow. We have a few of the details already. We know that they're going to focus on construction work, and retail shops outside of malls will be some of the first places to see restrictions lifted. What will that do to help Toronto?
Well, I think it'll allow some people to get back to work, and it'll improve the psychology of the city, because you didn't mention that I think they're going to make some moves on things like golf courses and marinas. And while that's not, those aren't meant to be trivial by any means, either in terms of the jobs they represent or anything else, I think it'll make people feel better on the May 2-4 weekend that, some things that they associate with summer and with good news are coming back. The key here is that I don't think it's going to be a huge transformation for this first phase. And I think that's important, because I think the numbers are better, but they're not yet where they need to be in order to have a much more wholesale opening up of the city, which a lot of people, including me, are praying for, but only when the time is right, only when public health says it's the right time to open up on a much broader basis, and when we're ready to deal with issues, like you said, like transit and other things like that.
Yeah, I mean, I was listening to you earlier today, and you were talking about some of the things you're doing, but you made that appeal yet again about how cities are really economic engines. And I wonder if you are feeling that even more right now, and whether you feel you are being heard by the provincial or federal governments when you make that appeal.
Well, we're making progress on that. But, the fact is, look, I know the Toronto number is better, although I do know that in Vancouver, they're losing $4 to $5 million a week. I think in Calgary, the number is 10 to 15 million a week. Toronto is losing $65 million a week. And as you weaken the cities, you weaken their ability, given that 80% of Canadians live in cities, you weaken the ability of those cities to be at the very foundation of the recovery this country must enjoy and come back as strongly as Premier Higgs said we would, and we could, and we will. But you cannot have weak cities doing that. Toronto alone, and I know it aggravates people in the rest of the country to hear this, but it's a fact. Toronto alone accounts for 20% of the entire economy of this country. So if we're ailing because we're broke and because we're busy cutting transit and cutting, childcare and cutting all kinds of things like that support people in going back to work and making a productive use of themselves, then we are going to be hurting the country. And so I want cities, all of them, from Vancouver to St. John's, to be strong, not to be in a financially perilous state. And that is going to require the provincial and federal governments, starting with the provinces, because they have principal responsibility for the cities, to sit down and sort something out to help us, because we're going to return that many times over into their coffers with revenues from HST, income tax, corporate tax. That's where the money all goes as a result of the success of economies in our cities.
And we've been asking this question for some time, at least here in Ottawa. What is your understanding of how your premier, my premier too, the Premier of Ontario, is making that pitch to the federal government? Because if he doesn't have the cash to do it, it has to come from somewhere.
Well, I think he hadn't been making much of a pitch before now, and he was, concerned with other things, keeping the healthcare system going. But today he made a very important statement, which said that we are in the corner of the cities. We understand we have to help. We need the federal government to sit with us in order to find out how we're going to do that, provide that assistance. That was a significant step forward. And I can only hope that he is joined by some of his other colleagues who realize it's in their own self-interest, but it is in the interest of the country that we keep cities healthy, that we make sure they have, they're not trying to dig themselves out of a massive hole. Just if the cities were left on their own to try and pay off these numbers that have come about as a result of the pandemic, it would result in property tax increases of 30, 40, 35%, which is not sustainable for people who are hurting right now. And on the other hand, we would have to massively cut transit. Windsor, I think, as I understand it, have closed their transit system. Now, how can you possibly operate a large city, Windsor, let alone Calgary, Vancouver, Montreal, Toronto, with a closed transit system? It's preposterous to even think about it. It gets people to work. It gets people to the places they're going to go and spend money and produce a healthy economy. So that's why we need help. And it will be help, as I say, that will pay itself back in a stronger country when we come out of this in fighting form, as I know we can.
Can you give me a sense of what you think Toronto is going to look like over the next couple of months? I know today you were talking about expanding patios for restaurants just to try and get people somewhere to sit so they're physically distant. But take away what the restrictions are now. But if you had to cast your mind forward to, June or July, what do you think Toronto is going to be like?
I think it'll be slightly different in that I think some of the physical distancing requirements will have been relaxed. Instead of having a crowd of 5 people, maybe by then it'll be up to 25 or maybe 50, but it still won't mean we can have the big events, whether it's a Blue Jays game or a Raptors game or even just a good solid Pride Parade. Those things have been canceled. I think you're going to see more people that will be, hopefully by then, back to the patios and restaurants so we can enjoy a semblance of summer, but they'll be sitting in tables quite far apart from each other because they can't be too close. They'll be wearing masks in many cases, I suspect, on transit and in stores. Some stores have already said that. The streets will be more crowded than today, but less crowded than normal. So I think what you'll see is a city that is in a profound transition, as all the Canadian cities will be. And there'll be sort of more life on the streets than you see today, but still not anywhere near back to normal, because it's going to take a long time, I think, for the numbers, the public health numbers, to match up to the ability that we can have to live a more normal life, whatever normal means anymore.
Okay, John Tory, thank you so much for making the time, sir. I know you're busy, and we really appreciate it here.
Thank you so much, Rosie.
Okay, that's Toronto Mayor John Tory. As we talk about how Canada's biggest city is coping, I know lots of people are wondering, well, how am I going to do anything this summer? It's such a busy time for travel. May long weekend coming up, of course, and this is all going to be very different. The Canada-US border is still closed to non-essential travel, but what about traveling inside Canada? As you heard from Premier Higgs, it's not really going to happen for his province, but can you travel within your own province to any other province? The CBC's Sarah Levitt and some of her colleagues helped us try and answer those questions.
I'm here at the Ontario-Quebec border. As you can tell, I'm obviously on the Quebec side, but am I allowed to cross over?
We've received a lot of questions. Just what are the rules around traveling to another province?
So, will I get stopped if I cross into Ontario?
When it comes to travel within Canada, Ontario is one of the provinces without restrictions. Want to go to British Columbia, Saskatchewan, or say Alberta?
Technically, you are allowed to visit, but the province says only if you really need to. And remember, you can't visit those national parks like Banff or Jasper. They're still closed.
What about the other provinces and territories? For the most part, only essential travel is allowed and self-isolation rules are mandatory. Take Yukon.
If you're a Yukon resident, you can come here, but you need to isolate once you're here for 2 weeks. If you're a non-resident, you need to prove why you must enter the territory.
And New Brunswick?
You're not welcome, unless, of course, you're an essential worker. But New Brunswick is even talking about upping its restrictions.
We need to take care to control the flow of people into New Brunswick if we're going to keep our curve flat.
Here's the thing though, yes, in most cases you can travel to other provinces, but the question is, should you?
Don't cross the border. We love our Quebec neighbors, but just wait until this is all over.
But what about travel inside your province? Plenty of cottagers ask that question with Victoria Day long weekend upon us. The rules are generally non-binding, but the advice from Quebec's deputy premier is pretty much echoed across the country.
Just because the region is reopened and that there is no more control, you must not go in those regions if you don't have a good reason to go.
The message this long weekend, use your judgment and consider the hot spots in your province before you travel. Sarah Levitt, CBC News, Montreal.
So how do we do this? How do we reopen safely, allow more people to leave their homes, maybe even go to their cottages, travel? What needs to be in place to help us do this, live with COVID-19? Dr. David Fisman is a professor and head of epidemiology division at the Dalla Lana School of Public Health at the University of Toronto. Dr. Fisman, good to see you.
Hi, thanks for having me on.
I avidly follow all your tweets to try and understand things on a topic that is very hard to understand. So tell me what you think has to be in place in order for people to feel safe. Is it testing, contact tracing, all of those things? Just give us a sense of what you would be looking for.
So the bedrock, we're going to build a revitalized economy on the bedrock of public health surveillance. That's our eyes and ears. COVID is very sneaky. It's hard to see without doing a lot of testing. So I understand the province of Ontario is going to be coming out with a testing strategy. All provinces need those because what we need to do is, there's this Hobson's choice that's out there, this false dichotomy that we can either have health or we can have a good economy, right? It's not so. What we need is strong public health surveillance and strong public health systems so that we can reopen our economy safely. Because I don't think people are going to be lining up to spend money if they fear for their lives, if they go to stores or if they go out in public. So we need strong public health systems so that we can open up our economy. All the things you mentioned, testing, contact tracing, some degree, as Mayor Tory said, of ongoing distancing are all going to be important, and they work together in critical ways to keep us safe and to keep what we call the reproduction number of this disease below 1. That means we don't have explosive exponential growth of epidemics. So just for an example, we talked about contact tracing a little bit. We need to have few enough cases happening. We need to get that reproduction number low enough that when new cases happen, it's actually possible for our public health units to track down the contacts of those newly identified cases and tell them to quarantine themselves so we don't have ongoing transmission. We can't do that if we're having hundreds of cases a day. So we need distancing to bring us contact tracing. We need lots of testing so that we can find all those cases in order to isolate their contacts. So all of these things sort of interlace and interact with each other to keep us safe. Predictably, yeah, go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say, one of the things that struck me this week was this story out of South Korea, right? This one gentleman goes to a couple of nightclubs and immediately there is a spread of the virus. I realize no one's going to nightclubs in Canada yet, but it does show you how quickly you can have a resurgence of the virus. What does that tell you about what we need to be doing here? Because the advantage that we have, I guess, is that that they are further along than us and they can teach us some lessons.
South Korea has taught us so much. They've been basically a month ahead of us all the way along. They exploded before we exploded. We've learned a ton from them very directly, and it's created some really direct relationships between Canadian researchers and Korean researchers. But as you say, they're the best, or one of the best countries in the world at controlling this, and they're having setbacks. We can predict that what's going to happen in the coming months is we're going to try to open up. We're going to have events that tell us, oh, you've gone a little bit too far. We know that our safety net is distancing. We can always go back to that. We know it shuts epidemics down. So we can retreat to that if we need to. But the way we know how to turn that safety valve on and off is excellent public health surveillance. And that, at this point, is based entirely on testing. So we need a really, really strong testing game so that we can know how far to open our economy and so that we can know if we need to tighten up on distancing, if we've gone too far, if we get a Korea-like situation. Korea's not the only one, right? We have cases back in Wuhan. We have cases in Germany now. We have cases in Singapore. All these places that have done really well are having resurgences, and we will too.
So what would you tell Canadians then we should be doing in terms of testing? I know that Dr. Tam has talked about 60,000 a day. We're nowhere near that, but what should we be hoping for in terms of a goal of testing for us to feel a little bit safer?
I think there are a couple of things. One is when we speak to colleagues in Korea and colleagues in New Zealand, which is another place that's done very well, they have expanded testing tremendously and also controlled their epidemics to the point where they can test whoever they want to test. We still have a situation here in Ontario where sometimes I feel, I'm a practicing clinician as well, and sometimes I feel as though we have people sent to testing centers in order to be told that they don't qualify to get a test. We need to move away from that. As a colleague from New Zealand was saying last week, at this point in New Zealand, they're testing anyone with a stuffy nose. They want to find more. They want to find every last spark in order to prevent the forest fire from starting up again. And we're not close to that in Ontario. We're getting close to that in terms of capacity, but the culture and the public health guidance aren't there yet, and that needs to change, and that needs to change soon.
I have one question from a viewer, if you'll let me, a Canadian who sent this one in, and we thought it was a good one for you to answer, so let's play it now.
Hey everyone, this is Andrew Athy in Toronto. My question is really around the potential easing of social distancing measures when that becomes appropriate. What would a gradual return to normal look like as the pandemic subsides? And how would we avoid provoking a potential second wave of infections? Thanks so much.
So that's a good question, particularly the second wave part. Do you want to address that, Dr. Fisman?
Yeah, I mean, I think we have to look at this as we are about to get up and walk through a minefield, okay? And we want to see where the mines are so we don't step on them. We know where some of the mines are. We know that large gatherings, and Mayor Tory alluded to this, some of the mines relate to large gatherings of large numbers of people. We know that we have issues with congregate settings, long-term care, hospitals, prisons. So we know where some of the mines are, where this thing blows up again. In terms of how we get back as close as we can to some semblance of normal life, I think what we do is we have those surveillance systems there so we can see when the disease is starting to resurge. And that's how we know we've gone far enough, and we're not going to go farther than that. I think, people have shown a remarkable willingness to change their behaviors. think the public's on the team here. They've shown a remarkable willingness to mask up, which I think is culturally different for us as Canadians, but is probably helping. And I think we need really good, transparent guidance and leadership from public health authorities.
Well, you've taught me a lot, and I'm sure Canadians as well. Dr. David Fistman, thank you so much. I appreciate making the time.
Thanks for having me.
That's Dr. David Fistman. He's a professor and head of epidemiology at the division of the Dalla Lana School of Public Health at the University of Toronto. And I do recommend his Twitter account. He tweets interesting things every day that teach me a lot. In these uncertain times for everyone, this includes post-secondary students. Many of them finish their school year with virtual classes. And now many of them are being told either we don't know what's going to happen in September or you're going to be staying online. Christopher Zwagstra is starting medical school at McGill University in Montreal this fall, and he joins me from Laval, Quebec. Good to see you, Christopher.
Hey, good to see you too. Thanks for having me.
No, thanks for being here. So you are going to have to go online in September, I guess. How do you feel about that?
It's a bit of a strange feeling. It's one that we kind of saw coming. But I'm wondering what it's going to look like for us, because as medical students, it's very important to have that hands-on approach and to be not learning only through theory, but also through our presence and working with our hands. So I'm wondering how that's going to play out. If it's a very theoretical course, it won't make much of a difference, but we're definitely going to be missing the labs if those aren't able to be accommodated next semester.
Yeah, for sure. I wonder if you think or are worried that you might get a sort of different quality of teaching or education, because you'll be missing some of that. And the fact is, when you're face to face with someone, things are just different anyway.
Absolutely. So everything changes when you're doing it in person. And I completely agree with you. It's almost impossible to have a complete education experience in medicine without having in-person labs.
And the fact that you are I guess you want to be a doctor. I'm just going to ask you a personal question. Has any of this sort of made you think twice or rededicated you to that idea?
I'd say no. It's inspiring to see the work of other medical professionals during a time of crisis, and that's something that I definitely want to do. However, it's just a little bit disheartening because I want to be well prepared for that, and I feel that an online format won't allow me to do that.
So what are you going to do? You're just going to go back and give it your best?
Well, that's one of the only options we're given, and perhaps they'll prepare some form of virtual lab for us. But as I said, it's a bit incomplete. But absolutely, we're going to give it 100% of the time, and we'll learn the theory as best we can. And if they can't accommodate us, then we'll probably just make up for it in the subsequent years with hopefully in-person labs at that time.
Okay, Christopher Zwagstra, he starts medical school at McGill University in September in some form. Maybe we'll see you back here on one of these shows as an expert one day. Thank you very much, Christopher.
Thank you. Have a great night.
Okay, stay safe. That is Christopher. He joined us from Laval. As we know, there's lots of universities trying to deal with this. How do they move classes online, and do students follow as well? The pandemic is giving Canadians some food for thought in many ways, not only about what they eat, but also how it actually gets to your kitchen tables. Maybe something we don't think about enough. The CBC's Rob Brown has been looking into how the pandemic is affecting Canada's food supply.
Thanks, Rosemary. Most of us have probably taken it for granted, haven't we? Walking into a grocery store to find the shelves stocked. We haven't had to think too hard about the complex systems that ensure what we need is available when we need it. But all of that has changed over the last 8 weeks or so, from toilet paper to hand sanitizer to our supply of meat. The Cargill beef processing plant in High River was for a time the site of the largest COVID-19 outbreak in North America. It's been the same story across the continent. Meat processing plants, beef and pork, closing and reducing shifts. And this has affected meat supply because it's a very closely linked cross-border sector. Right now, there's a backlog of 140,000 hogs in eastern Canada and more than 100,000 head of cattle in Alberta. Ranchers and farmers worried about how to manage their herds. And you, the consumer, probably wondering if this could lead to empty shelves. Cargill alone accounts for about 40% of the processed beef in our country. Food shortages apparently aren't a concern right now, but Sobeys does tell CBC News that consumers can expect some meat prices to go up. That said, shoppers are typically okay with shifting from beef to pork or chicken as prices change, and chicken production has remained stable in part because of the large number of chicken processing plants in Canada. As for other foods, potato producers would like you to double your order the next time you're asked, would you like fries with that? They're experiencing a massive backlog too. And they're heading into fruit season in BC. Orchards and farms working on physical distancing measures and collecting PPE as they begin the harvest. So from berries to beef, producers are dealing with all kinds of challenges to keep those shelves stocked. Rob Brown, CBC News, Calgary.
So yes, farmers, a major part of this country's food supply chain, and parts of them, of course, have been hit very hard by what's happening. The government has offered some support. We wanted to touch base with two of them right now to see how they're coping. Sherry Coppathorne Barnes is a fourth-generation cattle rancher in Jumping Pound, Alberta. Oh, it looks gorgeous behind you, Sherry. And Michelle Camps is the vice chair of the Potato Growers of Alberta. He's in Barnwell, Alberta. Looks pretty good behind him, too. Thank you both for making the time and taking these pictures outside for us to see where you do your business. Sherry, let me start with you. How has this affected your business right now?
From the beef side of this has been really tough because every day that one of our plants is shut down or slowed down, we're looking at 6,000 to 9,000 head of cattle being backlogged, meaning that many animals are stacking up within a system that aren't going to slaughter that should be. So our cattle feeders are facing huge losses right now because, like it or not, we can't stop these poor animals from calving or being fed, so we have to put a tremendous amount of costs into keeping them alive and keeping them healthy as we wait for our turn to get through.
And do you have a sense of how much you have lost for having to keep your cattle fed and there on your property for a longer period of time than planned?
Right now, at the feedlot level, guys are losing basically about $600 per head that they sell. Basically, it's costing them $4 per head per day. So our industry is losing roughly $500,000 every single day we're into these slowdowns. Now, what that means for me as a cow-calf producer is these baby calves that you hopefully can see over my shoulder, they may not have a market next fall because there won't be empty pens for them. And therefore, I will have no place to be able to sell these calves into going forward. Also, this is springtime and I need to be producing feed or planting feed to make sure that I've got feed for next winter. And I don't have enough area to necessarily be able to winter all these calves. So if they don't have someplace to go, I'm in big trouble.
Okay, I'm going to come back to you if I can, Sherry. I'll just get Michelle's perspective because everyone has also heard about the potato problem, Michelle. I'm not sure it's a problem. There's just too many of them. Tell me how your business has been affected.
Well, we went from a 7% shortage last fall during harvest, and then COVID came, and now all of a sudden we're dealing with about a 20% surplus of potatoes in the province. I mean, storage sheds like the one behind me are going to be full here going into the summer, and we're dealing with potatoes that are a perishable good, and eventually the shelf life of it ends, and we're going to have to get rid of it one way or the other.
And why has this happened? Because obviously people are still buying groceries and things. So why are you still overloaded with potatoes?
A very large portion, I would say 80% of the potatoes that are grown in Alberta are destined for the processed market. So that's the market that makes French fries, hash browns, potato chips, products like that. When the people go to the grocery store and buy a bag of potatoes from the vegetable aisle, that is a completely different market segment of our industry. Nevertheless, still an important market segment, but a very, very large portion of the potatoes grown in this province are being made into French fries. Right. And since people don't necessarily eat French fries at home, we're seeing a huge reduction of demand of our product here.
Just so I'm clear, and so viewers are clear, and listeners too, behind you that's full of potatoes.
Yeah, the building behind me is a climate-controlled potato storage. This particular one holds about 200 semi-loads of raw potatoes, the way they came out of the field. Yeah. And they'll be processed over the course of the winter and into the early summer into French fries for the restaurant business, yeah.
Okay, let me go back to Sherry then. Sherry, so you don't really know what the future holds or how this is going to work. The government did offer $252 million, and I know some of it was for people like yourself who were going to have to hold and feed animals for longer. Was that enough? And what more supports would you like to see?
It was a good start, but as you can tell, when you're accumulating $500,000 a day, it doesn't last very long. And again, from the cow-calf side of this, and remember, our industry is very segmented. What happens at the ranch level is very different than what happens at the feedlot level. So again, no matter what happens with these plants, we are still 3-4 months out of even understanding what this is going to do to my calf market. So there's going to have to be an ability to access funds because this costs us cash. And we have to keep these animals alive. We have to keep them fed. So that's going to be the biggest thing that we need. Now, whether it's through government funding or access to loans, that's going to be determined, but it is going to be our #1 issue.
What's the biggest worry for you? Are you at the point where you're worried about losing the ranch?
I don't have the luxury of worrying about that because we can't stop right now. Nature just tells us we have to go. We're calving, we're seeding, and we're going to keep going ahead. And it's the nature of what we do. We've never found ourselves, my family's been in this business for 130 years, and we've never had a point where we couldn't or didn't have an exit strategy or an option. So we're just going to keep working on hope and making sure that we lower our costs and do our best to make sure that the cattle feeders who are ahead of us are healthy, because that's where the crunch is today, and make sure that this system keeps working the entire chain.
All right, Sherry, I'm a fan of your determination, I must say. Michelle, what about you? There has been some support. Has any of that trickled down to you? And what do you think the future holds for your place?
Well, our province announced a little bit of help for small businesses, which is what we fall under. But the $252 million that you talk about, in reality, is for the entire agricultural sector, and it's not going to be quite enough. It's going to be far from enough, actually. And in order to get us through this period where we're going to have to dispose of product, and dump it in the field or feed it to the feedlot cattle, and one way or the other get rid of it at a very, very low price. It's going to put the next season, which is, we just finished planting here, it's going to put the next season in jeopardy. Are we going to be able to make our bank payments? Are we going to be able to afford inputs, pay our staff, things like that? That's going to be a problem coming up here.
Is that stressful for you, Michelle?
Yeah, it's very stressful. I got a family of 4, and my kids see us worry every day. Me and my wife run this farm together, and we have 6 full-time staff, and they definitely see that we worry. Yeah.
Yeah. If all Canadians come together and eat more potatoes, would that help?
It would help for sure. It would help some, but a large portion of the potatoes grown in Western Canada, I don't know much about the Eastern industry, but about Western Canada, are exported, so outside the country, either to the US or the Pacific Rim. And a lot of those countries are seeing reduced demand too. So there's definitely going to be a huge pile of surplus potatoes by the time August hits here, and that's going to be a problem.
Really tough times for both of you. I appreciate you sharing your perspectives, and you really helped Canadians, I think, understand as well. Sherry Copthorne-Barnes, a cattle rancher in Jumping Pound, Alberta, and Michelle Camps. He's the vice chair of the Potato Growers of Alberta, speaking to us from Bramwell, Alberta. Good to meet you both. Stay safe and good luck.
Thank you.
Thank you both very much. All right, there you go. Just a lot of potatoes out there. But as we heard, the concern here for farmers now, and I'll bring in Duncan for this, is not just what's happening now. It's how do you possibly plan for the months ahead when you don't know what the situation will be? It's a real struggle from producers.
If there is a French fry challenge, sign me up. I'll do my best to pitch in. Your conversation with Christopher sparked a lot of conversation online. Rosie, Christopher's a McGill student wondering what the fall is going to hold. There are, of course, a lot of young people who are wondering what their post-secondary schooling is going to look like. Stephen Augustine raised it up even another notch. He sent this very brief tweet, COVID-19, what's being done for university survival and also for international students? I think this is a story that we're going to start to see emerging as universities are trying to figure out where their revenues are going to be coming from as they are planning planning for the fall. Pierre Mercier sent a tweet which made me smile. Of course, it's May, and typically in Canada we'd be in the thick of the NHL playoffs right now. My beloved Maple Leafs would be making their run for the Stanley Cup. Pierre Mercier sent this tweet: is Gary Bettman serious at not considering canceling the rest of the NHL season? Of course, as you were talking with Dr. David Fissman there, he talked about these minefields being, some of the minefields being large gatherings, and so I don't think we're going to be seeing any sports anytime soon. And then, of course, lots of discussion about summer plans. I mean, that is for lots of Canadians, just trying to figure out what they're going to do for the summer. And Philip on Twitter said this: though some are pessimistic about intra-provincial travel this summer, I believe it's essential for so many reasons, not the least of which is to save small to medium tourism operators. #staycation. And Dima Zrik in Toronto said this on Twitter: I'm going to spend my vacation budget for 2020 in Toronto or day trips the most. So doing her best to support the city that she lives in. We've got a few minutes left in our special, but if you have more comments, we'd love to hear from you. Right now, we're going to turn the conversation toward the development of a COVID-19 vaccine. We're going to be joined by someone who's trying to do just that, but we do want to hear from you. Send us your questions, tweet us, email us, or you can leave us a comment on Facebook.
Okay, people have lots of things to say, and I'm glad everyone's struggling with their summer plans. Maybe staycation. Well, we're forced to have a staycation, but maybe there's some way to make that fun. I don't know. The other thing COVID-19 is doing, obviously, is changing the way we shop and, indeed, what we buy. The CBC's Anita Bath is in Vancouver with more on that.
Thanks, Rosemary. This is Vancouver's Granville Street. The empty sidewalks, far from the usual hustle and bustle we see here with people in and out of all of these shops. The pandemic has forced many storefronts to close, a lot of them boarded up like these ones right here. That, coupled with the fact that a lot of people are hesitant to go in stores that are open, mean that consumers have really changed their habits to start buying online. And that shift to e-commerce has been drastic. Sporting goods, furniture, and home decor have seen massive spikes across Canada as people take on more projects because of the pandemic. But problems with stock and shipment delays mean that some people do actually have to go to the store, but it doesn't always look the same. A lot of them are opting for curbside pickup, or they're having to brave those long lineups, being about 6 feet apart from those in front of them. So what are people buying? Okay, we're not hoarding toilet paper anymore, but sales are still up drastically. That's the same for paper towels and hand sanitizer. And all that baking that you're doing or your friends are doing, well, flour sales have nearly doubled over the same time last year from their normal levels. So what aren't people buying? Well, cosmetics purchases are down a lot. Same goes for cut flowers. The question is, will COVID-19 have a long-term effect on how and when and where we buy? Anita Bath, CBC News, Vancouver.
All right, so it's a tough time for lots of different industries, particularly restaurants across this country, and some have really adapted and come up with creative solutions. Jan Regier owns Pine Ridge Hollow. It's a restaurant and event hall in Oakbank, Manitoba, and she joins me now. Good to see you, Jan.
Thank you for having me.
So you're in your restaurant, which is empty there, obviously. What's been happening for you and your restaurant? How difficult has it been?
Well, we closed our doors March 15th, and by March 20th, we pivoted and launched an online meal and grocery service, which has gone over quite well. We have had amazing support. And as of the previous Monday, we were able to open our patio, which has been a slow start because we've had quite a cool spring here in Manitoba.
Yeah, but it is opening. Everyone's very jealous of that. I know when we watch Manitoba have that. You do have things like weddings and big events too there, and I imagine that's no longer on the table either.
Not at this point. We are still hopeful for the season, but we really don't know what to expect. At this point, we have certainly rescheduled many of our weddings in all of May and June for sure.
Have you been surprised with your own ability to adapt? Because it sounds like you did that pretty quickly.
We did. I mean, we have an amazing team. We had the fortune, because we have a retail store, of having a robust e-commerce system. So that really helped us to launch the program.
And do you think you'll be able to keep the business going? Are you hopeful?
I am very hopeful.
Okay. Good to hear, Jan. I know that's a lovely part of Manitoba out there near Birds Hill Park, if I'm not mistaken. Thanks for making the time very much.
Thank you.
Jan Regier in Oakbank, Manitoba. Now, of course, we've been talking about the things that need to be in place in order for the economy to start opening up. But the big answer, of course, is a vaccine or some sort of treatment. There are dozens and dozens of research teams from around the world working on finding a vaccine for COVID-19. And that, of course, includes here in Canada. Finding one could be the key to getting more normal than we will have in the next number of weeks. Daryl Falzarano is an adjunct professor with the Department of Veterinary Microbiology at the University of Saskatoon. He's part of the team trying to develop a vaccine for the virus, and he joins me now from his lab, which is very cool. Good to see you.
Nice to be on. Thank you.
All right, so this is obviously this is a good way to end the show, because everyone wants to know how close we are to a vaccine. What would be your best guess here, Daryl?
Of when will actually be ready, I think no one really knows that for sure yet. We're certainly moving closer and faster than you've ever seen before with any kind of vaccines, which normally are in the order of 10 years to be developed. Everyone's sort of talking around the 1 year mark. That would bring us to sometime like January of next year. It seems like that is a possibility, at least to some extent, not probably a worldwide rollout of a vaccine at that point, though.
Tell me what kind of work you're doing to contribute to this massive sort of worldwide attempt to get a vaccine.
So as soon as the sequence of the first viruses were available as soon as China made those available online, we started working on a vaccine concept here using a similar approach that we did for MERS coronavirus. Mm-hmm. That works quite well in alpacas. We back then were planning on making a vaccine for camels. Using the same approach, though, we're doing that now to make a vaccine for SARS-CoV-2, and we've immunized animals and seen that the vaccine is immunogenic, and we're just in the process now of seeing whether or not it's actually protective in an animal model. And
so the next step would be human testing?
So there's sort of some steps in between there. We would need GMP, like a good manufacturing practices product made. We expect to have one of those done in the summertime, so approximately in July. That would then be tested again in animals to ensure that it behaves the same way as our experimental vaccine, and then clinical trials, we're looking sort of fall for that starting.
You know, I heard the other day there's about 100 people doing what you're doing, working on vaccines right now, and you're all very much collaborating. Have you ever seen anything like this in the science world?
So people mainly get along, but of course, normally it's competitive, and you don't share your data usually until it's all complete, and then it comes out, published or sometimes presented early at conferences. Basically, now people are presenting their data almost in real time. So as soon as they have something available, that's shared.
Do you feel some pressure from all of us because we so desperately want a solution here? Do you feel the weight of that?
Sure, of course. I mean, normally we sort of, I wouldn't say we work slowly, but, there doesn't seem to be any immediate urgency to maybe what we do. And then this case is a little different. That's certainly not a scenario I would say any of us have really worked in before.
Can you give me a sense of how different it is, just in terms of a challenge for you to take on as a scientist?
Right. So we're doing everything sort of as quick as we can, but still as thoroughly as possible. So develop things, sort of things that would normally be done sequentially are all being done sort of one on top of another, and we have more staffing to do that. So our lab is over double the size they were, starting in January, and really everyone just working together as a team to move things forward.
So what would you tell Canadians then, Daryl, who are all, anxious to go back to some sort of normal, moving into parts of the country where some of the restrictions are being lifted? What would be your message to them tonight?
Continue to follow public health guidelines, right? That has been, fairly effective. Not effective enough yet. We still have increasing case numbers in some parts of the country. Follow those guidelines. Take it easy. Don't be too urgent to get, back to what maybe you want to be doing. And really, I think it's important that people maybe stay in the place that they're in. There's no need to be moving across the country all the time, or maybe even moving outside of your province. Stay in your home area and start appreciating things locally and looking at that first before you feel the need to, be traveling further if it's really not essential. And really think about what is essential. Versus what you would just like to do.
That's good advice. Daryl Falzanero, an adjunct professor with the Department of Veterinary Microbiology at the University of Saskatchewan. I'm going to let you get back to work because it's so important. Good luck.
Sure.
No pressure, but we're wishing the best for all of you and the team there.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right, let's go back to Duncan. I mean, that is the solution, right? It's either we come up with a treatment or we come up with a vaccine. It is nice to see Canadians pitching in there in a worldwide effort.
And in this conversation, I'm struck by, so many people have had a wrench thrown into their summer plans, but there's a lot of resolve and a lot of unity being expressed.
Yeah. And that is typically Canadian. All right, that is the end of our live town hall. It has been, listen, a difficult few months for all of us, lots of uncertainty. We are here to try and help you get through it. Your questions, your concerns, they're really at the heart of what we do. And we still want to hear from you. So send an email, covid@cbc.ca. The National is next. For Duncan and myself, thank you for watching.